Mason Cooper had seen some crazy things in his life, but watching a middle-aged woman in a power suit sip coffee from a mug that literally said HOA Queen, while her rusted minivan sat parked in his driveway, was a new level of absurdity. He stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the woman who had made it her life's mission to torment him since the day he moved in. Patricia Lawson, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, gave him a smug smile, took another sip, and casually scrolled through her phone like she hadn't just hijacked his property. "Patricia, you're blocking my driveway," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "No, I'm teaching you a lesson," she replied, not even bothering to look up. Mason took a deep breath. He had dealt with stubborn clients, overzealous bosses, and even the occasional rogue raccoon in his garage, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the level of petty he was dealing with now. He had been in the neighborhood for exactly 3 months, and in that short time, Patricia had fined him for having his garbage can out 3 minutes too early, accused his car of being an unapproved shade of blue, and once, in a moment that still made his blood boil, called the HOA board on him because his grass was 0.2 inches too tall. But this was something else. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Patricia, move your car." She sighed dramatically, finally lowering her phone. "Mason, honey, I run the HOA. You should have read the fine print. This driveway, technically, it's part of the community's easement zone, which means I can park here if necessary." He blinked. "Necessary for what?" "For maintaining order," she said matter-of-factly. Mason took another deep breath and counted to 10, then to 20, then to 50, because he was dangerously close to throwing her coffee into the bushes. "If you don't move your car, I'm calling the police." Patricia gave him a look of exaggerated pity. "Oh, sweetie, go ahead. My husband's a lawyer. Let's see how that works out for you." That did it. He pulled out his phone, dialed the non-emergency police number, and gave the dispatcher a brief explanation of the situation. To his complete lack of surprise, when the officer showed up, Patricia turned on the crocodile tears and spun a story so ridiculous that even Mason had to admire her creativity. "He's harassing me," she sniffled. "I felt so unsafe, I had no choice but to park here. I was shaking." The officer, looking entirely uninterested, glanced between them. "Ma'am, do you have any actual proof of a threat?" Patricia gasped as if deeply offended. He looked at me aggressively. Mason ran a hand down his face. "She's blocking my driveway." The officer sighed, obviously wishing he had chosen a different career path. "Sir, this is a civil matter. Take it up with the HOA." Patricia smirked. "Thank you, officer. I knew you'd understand." Mason watched the officer leave, then turned back to her. "You're really going to do this?" She tilted her head. "Oh, honey, I already did." As Mason stood there seething, he heard the sound of a motorcycle approaching. A sleek black Ducati rolled to a stop at the curb, and the rider dismounted with fluid grace. Removing the helmet revealed a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp, analytical eyes. He wore a leather jacket despite the heat, and something about his posture suggested military training. "Problem here?" the man asked, his voice carrying the slightly raspy quality of someone who'd spent years giving orders. Patricia's demeanor changed instantly. "Dominic, I was just explaining to our newest resident about the HOA regulations." The man, Dominic, surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on Patricia's car blocking Mason's driveway. "Interesting teaching method, Patty." Mason noticed how Patricia bristled slightly at being called Patty, though she kept her plastic smile firmly in place. "Dominic Vega," the man said, extending his hand to Mason. "Former city planner, current pain in the HOA's ass." Patricia's smile tightened. "Dominic serves as a consultant to our board, though his methods can be unconventional." "That's one way to put it," Dominic said with a slight smirk. He turned to Patricia. "The board meeting's in 20 minutes. Shouldn't you be preparing your slideshow on acceptable mailbox colors?" Patricia checked her watch and let out an exaggerated gasp. "Oh, you're right." She hurried to her car, started it up, and before pulling away, leaned out the window. "This isn't over, Mason, not by a long shot." As she drove off, Mason turned to Dominic. "Thanks for that." Dominic shrugged. "Don't thank me yet. Patricia's been running this neighborhood like her personal fiefdom for years. She's pushed out 3 families this month alone with her tactics." "Then why are you working with her?" Something flickered in Dominic's eyes. "Keep your friends close but your enemies closer. Let's just say I've got my reasons." He handed Mason a business card. "When you're ready to really fight back, give me a call, but be warned, once you start this war, there's no going back." With that cryptic message, Dominic mounted his bike and rode off, leaving Mason with more questions than answers. That night, Mason sat in his home office, staring at his laptop screen, trying to figure out what kind of medieval curse had landed him in this situation. He could fight her through the HOA, but that could take months. He could try towing her car, but Patricia had friends on the board, and that would just escalate things further. He needed something big, something undeniable, something that would take the entire game board and flip it over. He twirled Dominic's business card between his fingers, contemplating whether to call the mysterious consultant. Something told him that Dominic was playing a longer game, one that Mason might not fully understand. Instead, he turned back to his research. And then at exactly 2:37 a.m. he found it. The loophole. He scrolled through the county's zoning laws, rubbing his temples as he read through paragraph after paragraph of legal jargon. And then there it was, a single line that changed everything. Private residential driveways may be repurposed as personal helipads upon obtaining appropriate permits, at which point they will be considered aviation property and subject to FAA regulations rather than local HOA ordinances. Mason leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Then very slowly a grin stretched across his face. Patricia wanted to play legal warfare. Fine, he'd play. The next morning, Mason was up at sunrise, standing in line at the local zoning office with a fresh cup of coffee and the kind of grin that made people nervous. By noon, he had the application paperwork filled out, notarized, and officially submitted. Within 48 hours, an inspector came to survey the property, and by the end of the week, it was official. His driveway was no longer a driveway. It was a legally registered, FAA-compliant private helipad. Mason waited until the official paperwork arrived in the mail before making his next move. He walked outside, glanced at Patricia's car, still smugly parked in his driveway, and then carefully, methodically started laying out the new markings, bright yellow paint, large block letters, the whole deal. When Patricia finally came outside to investigate, her jaw nearly hit the floor. "What are you doing?" she screeched. Mason didn't even look up. "Oh, just repainting my helipad." Her eye twitched. "You're what?" "My helipad?" He straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You see, I found a fun little loophole in the county's zoning laws. My driveway isn't a driveway anymore. It's a FAA-regulated aviation property." Patricia blinked once, twice, then she let out a shrill laugh. "This is a joke." "Nope." He pulled the official paperwork from his pocket and handed it to her. "It's legally binding." She scanned the document, her face slowly turning redder with every line. This isn't possible," she whispered. "Oh, it is," he said cheerfully. Patricia's hands shook. "You can't just—" "Oh, but I did," he interrupted. "And here's the fun part, Patricia. HOA rules, they don't apply to aviation zones." For the first time since he had moved in, Patricia looked genuinely speechless. Then, in an act of sheer desperation, she did the most Patricia thing possible. She grabbed a bucket of water from her porch and dumped it all over his fresh helipad markings. Mason stared at the now smeared paint, then slowly looked up at her. "You just destroyed federal aviation markings." Patricia paled. "That's not—" Mason pulled out his phone and held up the screen. The security camera feed showed everything crystal clear. Patricia let out a choked laugh, shaking her head. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I absolutely would," he said, grinning, "and I'm thinking maybe it's time I make a phone call." For the first time since he had moved in, Mason saw something incredible. Patricia was terrified. Just then, the rumble of Dominic's motorcycle announced his arrival. He pulled up to the curb, taking in the scene, Mason standing triumphant, Patricia looking like she'd seen a ghost, and a half-washed-away helipad marking between them. Well, Dominic said, removing his helmet. "Looks like someone found the aviation loophole." He turned to Patricia with a raised eyebrow. "And someone else just committed a federal offense. Tampering with FAA-regulated markings is a felony, Patty." Patricia's head whipped toward him. "You knew about this?" Dominic shrugged. "Former city planner, remember, I know all the loopholes." "Then why didn't you warn me?" she hissed. "You never asked," he replied simply. "Besides, I warned you months ago that your tactics would eventually backfire." He turned to Mason. "Though I have to say, this is more spectacular than I expected. You move fast." Mason wasn't sure if Dominic was an ally or just enjoying the chaos, but right now, it didn't matter. The look on Patricia's face was worth it. The zoning office clerk blinked at Mason, then at the paperwork in her hands, then back at Mason. "You're telling me you turned your driveway into a private helipad?" she asked, as if she were struggling to comprehend reality. Mason smiled and nodded. "Yep, all legal, all documented. The FAA has jurisdiction now." The clerk let out a slow whistle and stamped the final approval onto his forms. "Well, that's a first." Mason took the paperwork and walked out of the office feeling like a king. He had won the first battle, but he knew the war was far from over. Patricia wasn't the type to back down quietly. She was like a cornered raccoon, desperate, unpredictable, and probably rabid. He wasn't wrong. That very evening, as he was admiring the fresh helipad markings, which he'd had to repaint after Patricia's water attack, she stormed over, her phone clutched in one hand, her HOA clipboard in the other. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, waving the papers in his face. Mason tilted his head. "I think it's hilarious, actually." She inhaled sharply through her nose. "I spoke to the HOA board. We are officially filing a complaint against you." Mason shrugged. "Go ahead." Her lips twitched. "And we are fining you." He crossed his arms. "For what?" "For violating the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood," she snapped. Your ridiculous helipad doesn't match the community standards." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Patricia, FAA regulations override HOA rules. This isn't community property anymore. It's federally recognized aviation property." She shook her head furiously. "I don't care. I will fight this. I will not allow you to turn this peaceful neighborhood into a circus." Mason almost felt bad for her, almost. But then he remembered the months of pettiness, the absurd fines, the way she had smirked every time she made his life harder. "Good luck with that," he said, walking back inside. Patricia did not take that well. The next morning, she had rallied her loyal band of HOA minions. They stood outside his house with clipboards, snapping photos, whispering, and taking notes like they were FBI agents investigating a high-profile crime scene. Mason watched from his window, sipping his coffee. He wondered how much time they had wasted on this nonsense instead of, say, actually improving the neighborhood. A few minutes later, Patricia marched up to his porch and rang the doorbell. Mason took his time answering. "You are in violation of multiple HOA regulations," she declared the moment he opened the door. Mason yawned. "You said that yesterday." Patricia's nostrils flared. "We have formally submitted a legal motion to have your so-called helipad removed." Mason chuckled. "Did you file it with the county zoning office?" Patricia's smug expression faltered. "We filed it with the HOA." Mason grinned. "Ah, so nowhere that actually has authority over this." She faltered for a split second but quickly recovered. "The board will not allow this. We are taking this to the city council." Mason clapped his hands together. "Fantastic. Can't wait. Meanwhile, my first scheduled landing is happening this weekend." Patricia's eye twitched. "You're bluffing." Mason pulled out his phone and showed her the email confirmation. "Nope, just got clearance for a one-time private landing." Patricia's face turned an interesting shade of purple. She turned on her heel and stormed off, furiously typing on her phone. As he closed the door, Mason was surprised to find Dominic standing at the side of his house, examining the helipad markings with professional interest. "How did you get into my backyard?" Mason asked. Dominic looked up, unapologetic. "Your gate was unlocked, or rather, I unlocked it." At Mason's alarmed expression, he added, "Former military, old habits die hard." "What do you want, Dominic? Whose side are you really on?" Dominic straightened. "That's the wrong question. The right question is, what do you know about Ridgeview Development Corporation?" Mason frowned. "Never heard of them." "You should look them up, particularly their board of directors." Dominic handed him a flash drive. "Patricia isn't just harassing you for fun. There's a reason she wants you gone. There's a reason she's pushed out 3 other homeowners this year." "What's on this?" Mason asked, turning the drive over in his hand. "Insurance," Dominic replied cryptically. "Don't use it unless you have to, and don't tell anyone you got it from me." "Why are you helping me?" Dominic's eyes hardened. "Let's just say Patricia and I have history, and I pay my debts." He turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, if you're serious about that helicopter landing, I know a pilot who owes me a favor." The next day, Patricia had escalated things in the most Patricia way possible. She called the local news. Mason was outside setting up a small seating area on his lawn when he saw the news van roll up. A reporter stepped out, adjusting her mic while a cameraman followed. Patricia, dressed like she was about to give a TED Talk on neighborhood tyranny, stepped in front of the camera with the enthusiasm of someone who had spent years waiting for this moment. "This man," she declared dramatically, "is destroying our community. He is turning our quiet, beautiful neighborhood into an airstrip for his own amusement." Mason sighed. He figured it was time to step in. He casually walked over, hands in his pockets, and smiled at the reporter. "You must be here about my FAA-approved helipad." The reporter turned to him, intrigued. "So you admit it?" "Oh, absolutely," Mason said, "and I have all the legal documentation right here." He handed the papers over. The reporter skimmed through them, her eyebrows raising. Patricia, noticing the shift in the conversation, hurried to regain control. This is a mockery of the HOA's authority. He is violating multiple neighborhood policies. The reporter turned back to Mason, and the HOA has no jurisdiction over this. Mason shook his head. None. Federal aviation law overrides HOA rules. Patricia spluttered, but it. The reporter, sensing gold, turned to the camera. And there you have it, folks. A neighborhood dispute turned legal spectacle. A man turning his driveway into a helipad and an HOA that can do nothing about it. Stay tuned. Patricia was fuming. She stormed off before the interview could get any worse for her. Mason grinned to himself. He knew this wasn't over, but watching her squirm was deeply satisfying. As the news crew packed up, Dominic appeared at Mason's side. You've certainly stirred the hornet's nest. Did you look up Ridgeview Development yet? Mason shook his head. Been a little busy with all this. Do it soon, Dominic advised. Patricia's not just angry, she's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. Mason spent the next few days preparing for the big moment, the landing. The day arrived, and with it an entire crowd of neighbors who had caught wind of the event. Some were excited, others curious, and a select few, Patricia's loyalists, stood with arms crossed, watching in disapproval. Patricia herself was front and center, her face a thundercloud of rage. What Mason hadn't expected was the black SUV that pulled up just before the scheduled landing time. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, flanked by two others who looked like private security. He scanned the crowd until his eyes locked on Patricia, who hurried over to him, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Dominic materialized at Mason's side. Richard Lawson, he murmured, Patricia's husband and lead counsel for Ridgeview Development. Looks like they're bringing in the big guns. What does a development company want with my house? Mason asked. Not just your house, the entire block. Dominic handed him his phone, showing an architectural rendering of a massive luxury condo complex. This whole neighborhood sits on prime real estate. Ridgeview's been buying up properties one by one, using Patricia's HOA harassment to drive down values and push people out. Mason's jaw tightened. So this isn't just about HOA power trips, it's about money. It's always about money, Dominic replied grimly. And that flash drive I gave you, it contains evidence of their whole operation, including some very illegal tactics they've used to acquire properties in other neighborhoods. Before Mason could respond, a deep rumbling roar filled the air, the unmistakable thrum of rotor blades slicing through the air. People gasped. Cameras were raised. The helicopter came into view, circling once before descending. The sheer wind force sent leaves scattering, rattling windows. Patricia was screaming something, but no one could hear her over the deafening noise. Her husband, Richard, was on his phone, gesturing wildly. The helicopter touched down perfectly, right in the middle of Mason's freshly painted helipad. The pilot waved, gave Mason a thumbs up, and then, for added effect, popped open a soda and took a sip like it was just another Tuesday. Mason turned to Patricia. Still think it's not a helipad? She was shaking with rage, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air. This is illegal. Mason held up his phone. Actually, it's all recorded and legal. Patricia looked around, realizing for the first time that the entire neighborhood was watching. Phones were out, people were laughing, some were even clapping. She let out a strangled sound and stormed off, shoving past people, her entire reign of terror unraveling in real time. Richard Lawson, however, didn't follow his wife. Instead, he approached Mason, his face a mask of controlled anger. Mr. Cooper, a word. Mason crossed his arms. I'm listening. This little stunt of yours is amusing, I'll grant you that, but you're interfering with matters beyond your understanding. Richard's voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man used to getting his way through intimidation veiled as reason. You mean I'm interfering with your plans to buy up this entire neighborhood on the cheap? Mason replied. A flicker of surprise crossed Richard's face before his lawyer mask slipped back into place. I see someone's been filling your head with conspiracy theories. Not theories, evidence. Mason held up the flash drive Dominic had given him. I wonder what the SEC would think about Ridgeview's business practices, or the county prosecutor. Richard's eyes narrowed. You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Cooper. So are you, Mason countered. Difference is, I've got nothing to lose. As Richard stormed off to join his wife, Dominic stepped up beside Mason. You just declared war on some very powerful people. Mason watched the Lawsons retreat. They started it. The neighborhood had never been this alive. Ever since the helicopter landed on Mason's driveway turned helipad, the entire block had turned into a buzzing hub of activity. People whispered about it at the local coffee shop, kids pointed at his house in awe, and even the usually indifferent neighbors had suddenly developed an interest in aviation laws. Patricia, on the other hand, had gone full nuclear. She had been humiliated in front of the entire community, outmaneuvered in a way she had never imagined possible, and worst of all, she had no power to stop it. But she wasn't going down quietly. The very next morning, a letter from the HOA was taped to Mason's door, an official notice declaring that his helipad was in severe violation of community aesthetics and demanding its immediate removal. Mason laughed when he read it. It was a desperate move, and he knew it. He took a picture of the letter, attached the FAA approval documents, and emailed the entire HOA board with a subject line that simply read, "Nice try." Within an hour, he received a reply from one of the board members. "We did not approve this letter. Patricia acted alone." Mason grinned. The cracks were starting to show. Later that afternoon, as he was watering his lawn, Patricia stormed over, her face red with fury. "You think this is funny?" she spat. "I think it's hilarious," Mason replied, not bothering to hide his amusement. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made a joke out of the HOA." Mason turned off the hose and looked at her. "Patricia, you did that to yourself." Her nostrils flared. "You will regret this." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening me?" Patricia smiled, but it wasn't the smug, confident smile she usually wore. This one was different. "Let's just say you won't be laughing much longer." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. Mason sighed. He knew she wasn't done, not yet. That evening, Dominic showed up at Mason's door with a grim expression. "We've got a problem. Richard Lawson is pushing to have the city council fast-track the rezoning vote. If it passes, they can use eminent domain to force everyone out." "Can they do that?" "With the right political connections and enough money, yes." Dominic handed him a folder. "But there's more. I've been digging into Richard's finances. The Lawsons are broke." "What? How is that possible?" "Bad investments, gambling debts, and a lifestyle they can't afford. This Ridgeview deal is their last chance to avoid bankruptcy. Patricia's been promised a 7-figure commission if she delivers this neighborhood." Mason processed this information, "So that's why she's been so aggressive." "Exactly, and now they're desperate, which makes them dangerous." Dominic hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Your house, it's the keystone property in their plan. The development can't proceed without it." "Why mine specifically?" "Location, your lot sits at the junction of 2 streets. They need it for the main entrance to the complex." Mason let this sink in. "So what's our next move?" Dominic smiled grimly. "We take the fight public." The next few days were oddly quiet. No new HOA letters, no fines, no sudden rule changes. It was suspicious, too suspicious. Then on Friday evening it happened. A man in a suit knocked on Mason's door. "Mr. Cooper." "Yep." The man adjusted his tie. "I'm here on behalf of Patricia Lawson and the HOA legal team. We're filing a lawsuit against you." Mason blinked. "A lawsuit for what?" "For disturbing the peace, illegal modifications to your property, and endangering the neighborhood," the man said, handing him a thick stack of legal papers. Mason took the papers and flipped through them. It was nonsense, all of it. "You do know that the FAA already cleared this, right?" The man gave a half-hearted shrug. "That's for a judge to decide." Mason leaned against the door frame. "Patricia put you up to this, didn't she?" "She's very determined," the man admitted. "But between you and me, this case has no legs. She just doesn't know when to quit." Mason chuckled. "Tell me about it." The man gave him a sympathetic look and walked away, leaving Mason standing there with a fresh pile of legal garbage. He knew Patricia was hoping this would scare him into giving up. That wasn't going to happen. If she wanted a legal battle, she was about to get one. Just as he was closing the door, his phone rang. It was Dominic. "Don't react to the lawsuit," he said without preamble. "It's a distraction." "From what?" "The city council moved up the rezoning vote. It's happening Monday." Mason felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "That's 3 days from now." "Exactly, and I just found out why they've been so quiet. The Lawsons have been going door to door offering cash buyouts to your neighbors. 7 houses have already sold." "Damn it," Mason muttered. "How many do they need?" "With those 7 plus the 5 they already owned, they're just 3 properties short of having enough to force the rezoning through." Dominic paused. "Including yours." Mason thought quickly. "The flash drive you gave me, can we use it now?" "It's risky. Some of what's on there was obtained, let's say, without proper authorization. If we go public with it, Richard could claim it was illegally obtained and inadmissible." Then we need another approach, Mason said, an idea forming. How quickly can you get that helicopter back here? That night, Mason did his research. By morning, he had a counter-lawsuit ready. If Patricia wanted to play dirty, he would play smarter. He filed for harassment, defamation, and illegal tampering with federal property. He also submitted the security footage of her destroying the helipad markings to the city attorney. Meanwhile, he went door to door talking to the neighbors who hadn't sold yet. Armed with Dominic's knowledge of what the Lawsons were really up to, he explained the full scope of their plan. Many were shocked to learn about the luxury condo development that would replace their homes. They offered me $50,000 over market value, one elderly neighbor said. Seemed like a good deal. They're going to make millions off this development, Mason explained. They're buying low now, but once the rezoning goes through, the property values will skyrocket. Word spread quickly. By Saturday afternoon, a group of concerned neighbors had gathered in Mason's living room. Dominic laid out what they knew about Ridgeview development and the Lawsons' financial troubles. So what can we do? Asked a woman who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. The vote is on Monday. We make noise, Mason said, lots of it. With Dominic's connections, they secured a permit for an emergency community meeting in the neighborhood park on Sunday. Flyers were distributed, social media posts were shared, and by Sunday afternoon, nearly 200 people had gathered, not just from their neighborhood, but from surrounding areas that had already fallen victim to similar tactics. Local news stations showed up, attracted by the controversy of the helipad story and now intrigued by this grassroots uprising. Mason, standing on a makeshift platform, explained the Lawsons' scheme to the crowd. This isn't just about an HOA overstepping its bounds, he declared. This is about wealthy developers using intimidation and manipulation to force us out of our homes. The crowd roared its approval. Patricia and Richard, who had shown up to try to control the narrative, found themselves increasingly isolated as neighbor after neighbor stood up to share stories of HOA harassment and suspicious property dealings. Then, just as the momentum was building, the distinctive sound of helicopter blades cut through the air. The crowd looked up as Dominic's pilot friend made a dramatic flyover. Hanging from the helicopter was a massive banner that read, "Stop the RIDGEVIW scam, save our homes." Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled for better angles. It was media gold. Patricia, seeing her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time, lost it. She stormed the platform, grabbing the microphone from Mason. "This is all lies," she screamed. "This troublemaker moved in and has done nothing but cause problems. He doesn't care about this community." Richard tried to pull her away, but it was too late. In her rage, she let slip the very thing they'd been trying to hide. "Do you know how much money we've spent buying out your worthless neighbors? How many palms we've had to grease at City Hall to make this deal happen?" The crowd fell silent. The reporters leaned in, recording every word. Richard's face went ashen. Mason calmly took back the microphone. "Thank you, Patricia, for that illuminating confession. I'm sure the district attorney will find it fascinating." It didn't take long for things to start unraveling. Within days, Patricia received an official notice from the county court. She was being investigated for destruction of property and misuse of HOA funds. Apparently, during the city's deep dive into her actions, they discovered she had been funneling HOA money for personal expenses, including fancy dinners, vacations, and suspiciously expensive home renovations. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board, realizing the storm that was about to hit, held an emergency meeting. Patricia was removed as president by unanimous vote. Her supporters tried to protest, but at this point, she had become too much of a liability. The city council, facing intense public scrutiny and with several members now under investigation for corruption, indefinitely postponed the rezoning vote. Ridgeview Development's stock plummeted as news of their tactics spread. Richard Lawson, facing potential disbarment for his role in the scheme, distanced himself from the company. Patricia, refusing to go down quietly, tried to hold a press conference in her driveway. It did not go well. A few news crews showed up, but instead of giving her the platform she wanted, they grilled her with questions about the financial scandal and her abuses of power. The interview went viral almost instantly. Clips of Patricia stumbling over her words, trying to justify her actions, and ultimately storming away in frustration flooded social media. The internet dubbed her Helipad Karen, and within hours, memes were everywhere. Mason watched it all unfold with a bag of popcorn. A week later, Patricia put her house up for sale. The once all-powerful HOA queen had been dethroned. Her loyalists, now leaderless, scattered like cockroaches. Without her constant interference, the neighborhood started to relax. People began painting their houses the colors they actually wanted. Driveways were no longer under strict parking surveillance. Even the fines for grass being too tall mysteriously stopped appearing. Mason, despite everything, decided to keep the helipad, not because he needed it, but because it was a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with petty tyranny is to outthink it. One evening, as he sat on his porch sipping his coffee, Dominic walked over, looking more relaxed than Mason had ever seen him. "You know," Dominic said, taking a seat beside him, "I've been fighting the Lawsons for years. They pushed out my sister's family from their home in Oak Ridge Heights with the same tactics. Watching them fall like this," he smiled, "it's been satisfying." "Is that why you helped me? Revenge?" "Partly," Dominic admitted, "but also because someone needed to stand up to them. Most people just give in, take the buyout, and move on. You fought back." The new HOA president, a much more reasonable man named Tom, walked over. "I just wanted to say," Tom said, leaning on the railing, "you did the neighborhood a favor." Mason smirked, glad to hear it. Tom chuckled, "Also, just out of curiosity, are you actually planning to land another helicopter?" Mason thought about it for a moment, then grinned. "Maybe, just to keep things interesting." Tom laughed and shook his head. "Well, if you do, let me know. I want a front row seat." As Tom walked away, Mason leaned back in his chair, looking up at the sky. The war was over. Patricia was gone. The neighborhood was finally peaceful. And the best part, he never had to worry about someone blocking his driveway again. "You know," Dominic said thoughtfully, "with your legal skills and my planning experience, we could help other neighborhoods dealing with HOA tyranny." Mason raised an eyebrow. "What, like HOA vigilantes?" Dominic grinned. "I prefer community advocates, but yeah, something like that." Mason considered it. The idea had merit. After all, Patricia Lawson couldn't be the only HOA dictator out there. "Let me think about it," he said, though they both knew he'd already made up his mind. Some battles were just too satisfying to fight only once.